Is to accept the minutes of the June 7th meeting.
Second.
For a second, okay. Any amendments to the minutes? No. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as written, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's everybody. All right. So I threw Luke under the bus a bit. He and I were going to do a webinar. I missed it. I know he was having trouble getting in, and I just want to put an item in there to see if there was anything that came out of that you wanted to share with the group.
There was. Let me just pull up my notes from it. It was a good webinar. It had a couple of points that were specific to us. Municipal Association. One of the most important things that they talked about that was something we talked about was the idea of closed sessions, especially standardized closed sessions. That seems to not be appropriate from their perspective. They have a list of appropriate times, and what the distinction was, and we were leaning heavily in our discussions on the impact to someone's reputation. And what they said is the standard is that it has to be a significant impact on reputation, not a trivial one. And so it's not appropriate from what I've had the conversation so far. I am following up, just to be clear. I've got a call in and an email in. But what I gather so far from the attorneys for the New Hampshire Municipal Association is that you have to be very careful on your non-public sessions. When you make them routine, that's sketchy. In fact, one of the things that I believe I understood was that you have to take a 2/3 vote to go into non-public session every time, and that's supposed to be a roll call vote.
Yes, roll call vote.
And you have to identify the reasons for why you're going in that match the...
You have to cite the Roman numeral.
Right, and so one of the things that occurred to me is in some of the things we were writing up and reviewing this week, our standard process was not even to open them or review anything outside of a non-public session.
Right.
And that might be problematic, so I think we need to get clarity on that.
So we may need to open them, not discuss them necessarily, but say, oh, okay, this is something that's going to need non-public, and then go into non-public.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that
right.
we would have to make a determination after looking at it to say, this is what, it may not at all, impugn someone's reputation, in which case there would be no reason to go into non-public.
Right.
It's a point of clarity on, even with a document, from what I understand, I could be totally wrong, but even with a document, if you're in a public session and you open a document, that document now becomes part of the record. You can't then say, take back, it's a gimme, I didn't want to introduce this in public. We're now going to non-public. From my understanding of that process. And so, like I said, I could be off on that, but I'd like to get clarity on that as well, Luke. So I appreciate the fact that you're doing outreach on that.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple other notes. They did say that you can allow members of your committee to attend remotely. You as the chair and the group could vote. You'd have to do it each time. So for example, if Neil could have been here tonight remotely but couldn't be here in person, it's perfectly okay for us to vote and allow that one person to be here as long as you have a quorum on site.
So, and I'm sure the law has changed. I know that was up for at the state this year. At one point, you could vote to have somebody remote, but they couldn't vote on actions. So I don't know if that's still the case, or they can be a fully vested remote person.
It didn't say that. I didn't see anything to that effect in the
Okay, that's good.
presentation, but that wasn't really my focus. I just
Sure.
made a note of it.
Yeah.
You're not required to allow public comment unless it's advertised that input is accepted. And then there are some control. Once you do allow public comment, of course, that opens up the whole standard processes. They
Yep.
can record, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Let's see. And then that goes through just what the conduct of the meeting, which we're all pretty familiar with. Legal counsel, protecting from liability, group of employees, and of course, people who are, when we go into public session, some of the people there have the right to say, I don't want this to be in public session, and pull it back out. But again, the harm to the reputation must be severe, not trivial, and the claim of harm cannot be asserted by the member of a public body that is convening the non-public session.
Interesting.
Wait, can you say that one
The
more
claim
time?
of harm cannot be asserted by a member of the public body that is convening the non-public session. What I believe they mean there, my takeaway was that I couldn't claim that I was being harmed because somebody was speaking about my behavior on the ethics committee, for example. I do not believe it's a general prohibition to say somebody else other than the board must make that motion, or, you know. So I believe that's all it was relating to, is I couldn't, you know,
Sure.
demand it for myself as a
Okay.
public person. No requirement to give notice to public members who be, no requirement to give notice to public members who may be the subject of reputational damage. So there, I mean, obviously, we've talked about that, but it's not required. It's a good idea to notify the public in postings on agenda if you will know, and you will use non-public session, though not required. So again, that was something that they said, and I know that the school boards and the town selectmen have done this before, where they advised, listen, if you know you're gonna go into public session in the first hour, post it so people aren't waiting around in the, you know, for you to do something for that first hour.
Right.
That was just more of a courtesy.
Luke, did they give a definition of what the difference between significant and trivial is?
They said, hold on. Not significant, but severe.
Severe, sorry.
Versus trivial. They gave examples, but you know, the couple of examples I have weren't terribly helpful. Let's see. Here's the answer he gave me I asked the question, must all inquiries or complaints be be public? A concern about publicly alleging ethics violations prior to vetting by the ethics committee, or can the board hear inquiries and complaints / concerns about reputation? The attorney answered, he said, again, it really depends on whether the ethics complaint will seriously harm the standing and reputation of the person in the community. If a lawyer is being accused of stealing money from her client, the town, that would seriously harm the attorney's professional reputation, and that would support a non-public session. If a ZBA member is accused of not reviewing the meeting's minutes, I mean, that's pretty trivial. So I'm sure that somewhere in between is the real answer, and that's our job, is to say, well, this, you know, what's the nature of the challenge?
Okay, right.
And so, let's see, did I miss anything else? Oh, there's HB 108 is a relatively new from 2022 that requires a list of non-public meeting minutes. Must review sealed minutes to see if any can be released, and employees who have complaints filed are not required to be notified or invited to attend the meeting. So again, those are separate bullets from the discussion. Again, there's a difference between, and they sort of mentioned this, there's a difference between what's required and what's appropriate,
Right.
you know, under the different circumstances, but. So, again, more questions than answers, but my takeaway was we need to reassess our direction to go into non-public every time, and maybe have some, you know, preliminary screening or something. I don't know
Yeah,
if that's the right word.
Interesting. I mean, I think getting some more clarification about what that level is, and if we can make that standard would be helpful. But even if we wanted to open them, it kind of changes the process. We can't open one and read it out loud, right? So it's like, somebody has to pre-open it and then send people copies so we can discuss it without saying what the words are, if we're gonna do that in public, right?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to navigate that, honestly.
Definitely an ambiguous situation, because once you start sharing it too, it becomes, unless, I don't know, can we do that privately within our committee emails, you know, to have that type of pre-read on it?
Not if there's more than two of us.
Discoverable.
Yeah.
Right, so,
Unfortunately, I think you have to go into non-public.
In order to
All
open
of
it.
you look at it.
Right, yeah.
If it's okay,
then,
come out of non-public and unseal it.
Right.
okay,
That's the only way you can do it.
That was my point, like, you know, so if we're here and we're in public and you open it and it's something that could have a significant impact, right?
It's too late.
You can't call it back, the horse has left the barn, so
Right.
from what I understand, is that accurate, Naomi?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you'd have to go into non-public, make a decision, come out of non-public, but they're saying like a standard practice, you should really.
Well, I think that the point was that you have to vote each and every time. It has to be a conscious decision each and every time, and it has to be justified by one of those pillars. So, again, I don't think you're gonna get in trouble for erring on the side of protecting someone. However, I think where you might run into problems is after you review the case, for example, and if there is no reputational harm, but then you decided to keep them sealed anyway,
Sure.
and that were later to come up, that might be an issue.
Yeah, so I mean, like, from procedurally, we would come to the meeting, we'd start the meeting, we'd say the Pledge of Allegiance, we would, have whatever mail in front of us, we would evoke a non-public under 91A, A, and C, probably, and then, open them up, review them, and decide, like, this one's got to stay, these we can go back into public session, right? Like,
Right, so a similar thing,
Process.
Yep.
Yeah.
Would it be appropriate for the chair, for example, to receive the mails and review them prior to our meeting and then have a highlight as far as, this might be serious or, so I don't know which would be
it would then
appropriate.
be, I believe, and I could be wrong on this, but I then think the process by which she may have received them could be discoverable, like if they came to her in an email, because they're not sealed,
Right.
which was why we were trying to get to a place where they were sealed.
Sealed and in the mail per se,
Yeah.
without a return address too.
that's interesting. So,
Yeah.
school board, where we get letters and complaints all the time, right? And so, we get the email individually, or
Or the
is-
letter,
or the
yeah.
superintendent gets it, and then it gets on the agenda as this is a non-public discussion or a public. So somebody's made that call prior to the meeting.
That's what I was
But,
curious about.
to your point, that email is then discoverable. No, nobody has asked for them, I guess, but, right, so I have to go maybe check with lawyers to see if that's even,
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of other things we need to consider too. Right now, we're talking about providing the public with 3 forms to submit, and there's no delineation of what we go into non-public for, even if it's an inquiry and has no business at all being in non-public. Right, so there may be some thing that we can do to label the outside of the envelope, A, B, or C, or whatever the form number is, in some way to identify it, so you're not,
right,
I think that we can navigate it, but I also think that we, given the history in the town and the last time there was an ethics committee, I'm not sure we should spend a lot of time building bulwarks against something
Sure.
that may never be
Right,
somebody coming
true.
in for discovery, because
Right.
really, with all the processes that are clearly outlined in our own policy, et cetera, by the time a citizen or employee brings something to the ethics committee, it's, as a complaint, my understanding is it's already gonna be vetted through some other
right.
group. So,
Good point. I mean, I think, to your point, it's important that we just don't say we're gonna do everything non-public till we choose otherwise, right? That's not how we can act. And as we start going through, some of these concerns, we'll probably get, that's not case law, but we'll have more
Get better at
examples.
it.
right.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so, thank you for going. I wish I had been there.
By the way, the entire seminar is available, as all of those are, on the
Oh, that's true.
their
That's
website, so you can go and see the slides and listen to the audio
Oh,
as well.
that's good.
Good, because I still haven't gone through the entire, I am still working with Norton on my laptop.
Oh,
And it's
no.
still scanning, and I'm going, I opened it up again today, and it's still there, and I'm going, what is going, and I have not been able to get into, thank God I've got an iPhone.
Wow.
That's the only thing that's been my salvation, so, yeah. I wish I could have been at that webinar, but now I know I can go on it. Good.
All right, so the other topic, Neil, I gave him my notes from our last meeting, and he made 5 really in-depth documents, which is great. I was talking to Luke earlier, and this feels very much like the policy committee's work that we would do at school board, and at that point, it's like you gotta rip things apart line by line, because the 5 of us have a consensus that this is what we want to give the public, right? And we have to be able to defend it, right? Because anytime this committee votes on something, we're all it's our duty then to defend it and educate and such, right? So, what I wanted to do is go through each of these documents, and honestly, this is a lot of work, so we might not get through all 5. I just listed them in random, the first document I saw on the agenda. I'm wondering, the one that is most critical might be the actual form. So I don't know if we want to start with that one.
Which one, the
The
request for
request?
advice?
Request for advice and counsel?
Yeah,
Yeah. Does that sound good?
yes.
Okay, so, my first question for the group, it says request for advice and counsel. Do we have to call it an inquiry based on what was defined in the original paperwork, or can we say advice and counsel? You know?
The- Weren't there 2 things that we had to have? One was an inquiry, and the other was a request. Are they separate?
No, there's a
No,
request for
also the
written,
same.
there's a request for written, which
Okay.
we already had that form, so we needed an inquiry form.
Right,
Okay,
so
okay.
I think what we do need to do is attach the inquiry request for advice and/or counsel on that form, and that way it's under that title. It makes it a clearer path.
So can you say that again, when you say you
All right.
want to associate this document with?
With, it's inquiries, and an inquiry request for advice and/or counsel.
Oh, I see. So just put that into the title.
Right, just put that
Okay.
into the title and then it clarifies it.
Right, because.
I will also suggest respectfully that we come up with a standard for the form numbers rather than the ABC, maybe
Yeah.
E-1, E-2 for ethics, so that we can keep track of them
Yeah.
and distinguish them
Right,
from
yeah,
other
because it
forms in
said Form
town.
AB, I wasn't sure quite what he was talking about, so we need a standard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in the original implementation, inquiries is C, right? It's a
Correct.
large thing, so we can obtain advice and counsel for ethical issues, but the subcategory starts with inquiry. So if you say inquiry request, that needs that, that's good.
I'm trying to pull up the original document because I don't have it in front of me, so. Do you have an extra copy on it? If you don't, it's okay.
Well, you can
I
take
can
a
try to
peek.
find it.
No,
I'll look, it's okay. It's, because I think it's on
Fine.
the website.
is it, I could never find it, and then I had one copy.
I can
and
email a
it's-
copy to you right now, if you
Okay,
can.
yeah, well, let me see if I can find it first before. Because I think it was out there.
It did come to us in email.
So we've got other documents that may be attachments to these,
It would,
because we've got the request for written advisory opinion and one of our other.
Right, and that one is not for the public. That
Okay.
one you have to, you can ask as a committee, an employee, or a elected official.
All right,
But,
I agree with Suzanne, though, it should match.
yes, oh, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like word for word, it should match, because I think this can be confusing anyway.
Right.
correct.
So,
So if it has a clear title that links it directly to the Clause C under inquiries, and then we could go into Clause D for our complaints and list our, so how would we want to label our documents?
or maybe even do it by clauses, if that's the case. I don't know, though, however.
Neil, I think the 2 meetings ago, it said we should do like A, B, like make this as simple as possible.
That's what he put in, yeah. Right, but my concern is that oversimplification might confuse with other, I don't know what other forms other
How we can
committees have
link
in
it.
town.
Sure,
Right.
So if you come into the town office and say, I want to see the Form A,
yeah,
Right,
what are you
Which-
going to get
which
down
A?
here?
sure.
Which
Yeah.
A?
Which A are you gonna get?
So
if
we
we've
could
got-
do ECA.
Something like that.
Easy,
That's
yeah.
what I was thinking,
Yep.
E1 or
Right.
Yeah.
EA or whatever, that's,
Ethics Committee,
1 or A.
Form C,
Yeah.
Form A, whatever, or C, because it would then semicolon or colon, and then if there are multiple parts to that one.
Right.
Sure.
Then with, that way, they can be tracked.
right. It's the full line, and then it's the short abbreviation, right? So like a ECA, ECB, ECC, with a link on the website to like the full name, right? Because when I got to the Form A, Form B, I got confused too, so.
So
Alright.
if we keep this request or inquiry for request for advice, and I want to say
Counsel.
and/or, because I think that would be,
And/or council?
and/or, yeah.
See,
Do you, this question, for advice or counsel, do you have to certify that you've already gone through everything, or you don't have to have gone through everything?
You can't have gone through everything,
Yeah.
because it's a question to see if you have a
If you-
complaint, right?
Okay,
I
I
think.
was just
Yeah,
looking at
that's
the
only on a
bottom.
complaint.
Yeah.
Yep.
My
Yeah.
understanding.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so maybe we should go line by line, because I think there's a lot of things we want to rip apart. So inquiry, request for advice and/or counsel is Suzanne's amendment.
Do you want to just thumbs up those and make them
Yeah,
done
let's do
as we
that.
go along?
Yep, so is,
So without objection?
yep, without objection, my moderator expert who knows the process better than I. Is that good? Good, all right. So your name, okay, that's fine. The title, office held, or position confused me a bit, because if this is just a form that the public can do, will that make them think that they have a position? Is that relevant for this form?
I don't think so, because, I mean, the position most of them are gonna be in is citizen
Right.
or employee, but, you know, if it's an employee, I suspect that will
Hey,
become
hey, Neil.
apparent pretty quickly.
Well, I mean, you could do a circle, right, with all the different types of,
Sure,
right, like RUA,
yep.
There are so many options now, though. Where do you stop the list?
citizen, employee, elected official, appointed official.
Then if it's one of those elected officials or appointed, then you want to know what the committee is, right? So I guess. I can see why you would have a line. So Neil, what we're doing is, this is great. Thank you for making all that work and effort to get this in writing, because then we can sort of mock it up and figure out, like,
Certainly.
right? And so there's a ton of work here, which is great. So we've started with the form, and thus far, the only change is because the process is defined, said inquiry, the request is inquiry request for advice and/or counsel, so that was a small tweak. And now we're looking at the title of office held or position, and I was a little bit confused, because I assume most of these we're getting are gonna be the members of the public, and so we were just saying, should we have 4 bullet items, or some way to
Well,
go ahead.
This is a request for advice. First of all, I apologize, I'm late. We were in Maine. We misestimated the amount of time.
Yeah,
Taking
no,
the scenic route.
Forgiven. All you had to do is say Maine.
Yeah.
You're forgiven.
Yep,
Route one.
after holiday.
Lobster rolls for lunch, guys.
nice.
This is a request for advice and counsel, and this cannot be made by members of the public.
Wrong. So we have a written form, that's everyone. This one is the inquiry, which can be a member of the public, right? Because we already have the request for written form, which is the only one that the members of the public can't fill out.
Correct, this was an employee.
So see,
board
or employee or resident below.
So I would think it would be an easy.
Right, you
Right.
are.
C.
I am incorrect.
No.
Okay.
So the question was, do we want something whereby, if you're not a member of the public and you want to say, I'm a member of a committee, I'm an employee, if you want to have that extra information, should we have an extra line there?
Why do we need title or office held or position?
We don't, right? So if this can be anyone, we could just cross that line out then,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
So is this on the first form or the second form?
Of course.
On the
And
first
we-
one?
Right here.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So we're getting
Well-
rid of title of office
Yep.
held or position?
Well, wait a
Without
second.
objection.
What would happen if somebody who lived outside of Ware held an office or a position, well, wouldn't hold an office, but could hold a position? Somebody works for Public Works,
Okay,
okay? And when they put down their address, they say New Boston.
okay.
And we know that they can't do that because they're not a resident, okay? So if they are not also
An employee.
an employee or,
So they have to certify that they're a town official, board member, employee, or resident, right?
Could
when
you
they sign
circle
this?
one of those?
Yeah?
Could you just put a check next, to a box next to each one of those on that line down below? I hereby
Please
certify.
circle.
And then, yes, have them check.
Circle one.
That's a good
One.
idea.
Yeah.
Sure. So cross out title of office held or position up at the top,
Okay.
and put in the Luke's boxes at the bottom.
Or circle one comment or something.
Circle or underline, yeah. Would be better, underline? Or circle?
I'm not partial.
I'm just trying to
Checks-
think,
yeah,
what's gonna
I'm-
make
I
it
agree.
easier and visible?
I think circle,
Circle would make it a little
There you
pop a
go.
little bit more
Yeah.
for us.
So I am a Ware Town official, board member, employee, or resident, and in between
Circle
the
one.
T and the semicolon, we'll write parenthesis, circle one.
yep.
Or circle. All that apply.
Oh, yeah, because they could be more than a resident.
Sure.
They could be an employee or board member, too.
Or if you're the town official,
But
you're probably a
from our
resident.
point of view, does it matter?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay, good. And then applicable provision to ethics if known.
Okay.
That makes sense. Then please describe the specific issue that you have.
So does that circumvent the written request for advisory opinion?
No, the written request can't be a resident.
Okay.
And I
Correct.
assume that's because that's some piece of paper that that committee then can go do something, do their business with. I assume that was the intent of that form.
Okay. So shall we make this our EC, Ethics Committee Form C:2? And that way it would follow under the inquiry portion of it, but it separates it out. So it would be the inquiry request for advice and/or counsel, and then the written, the request for written advisory opinion form, which is an inquiry as well, would be under Form C:2.
Well, I was thinking somewhere here, Neil had some suggested form letters. Oh, Form C was ethics complaint, written advisory was ethics concern, he said Form A, so it would be ECA.
ECA, but that wouldn't
Oh,
fall
EC-A.
under the inquiries of the Town Ethics Code implementation.
We had
Remember
said
how
we were
we're
gonna
trying to-
reference them to the same,
Line.
to the same line as the,
Yeah, but I only saw, so which form are you looking, so I saw inquiry on it, do you see, does that call out complaint as under a sub-bullet? That's where
The
I,
request for written advisory opinion was under inquiry as well. So
Yeah,
that
so-
would be for obviously non-resident, but just to
I think it,
identify the forms.
if we decide, if we don't have to decide that now, but if we decide to use the Form A, Form B, Form C modification, then right on the top of this, we could put Form A.
Right.
Or whatever it is.
so one slight discussion we had before you got here was, because there's so many Form As, we would
Yeah.
EC dash A, each
Fine.
So we
say
go
that
with
it's
our,
our form.
yeah,
EC for Ethics Committee?
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
one other suggestion is adding an email address line on there.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's probably makes sense, right? Because that's typically how you reach
I'm
out to
thinking for
people.
communication, maybe responses to send a copy at the end. If there is a written response, you could
Right.
send it directly, but also just for
So
interrogatory.
between address and telephone number?
Sure. Yep.
Okay, got that.
Circle one. And then, I don't know if you caught, we wanted to put the word inquiry before request for advice and/or counsel, because that's how it's referred to in the original document.
Inquiry for advice and counsel instead of
Yep,
request?
inquiry request for
Inquiry
advice
request,
and/or
okay.
counsel.
And this is EC 1 or ECA? What?
A.
C,
ECA.
Form C and number
Form
one.
EC.
That would be
Is it
Form
Form
C
C?
because it would be line C under inquiries under our ethics code implementation.
Okay, so that I hear that, but
That's
I
the
don't
link.
see where the complaint, okay, and D is complaints.
Correct.
Okay,
So
so
those
it's
would be
EC dash
Form D.
C one.
One. And then the C2 could be for the employee.
The written record.
Right. Non-resident, let me say that. It's
Would you repeat that? What goes at the top?
So EC dash C, because it's subsection C, dash 1, because under inquiries, there's this form, but then there's the written form.
So
that'll-
Form EC-C-1,
C, or is it C dash 1 or
Or
C1?
why don't we do colon?
colon 1.
Yeah. That
EC
way-
okay, yeah, that makes
allows
sense.
it, you know, the extension.
So Form EC-C:1. Is that correct?
Yep.
EC form, did you say dash C or Form C?
EC dash C colon 1.
Where does the
Form
word
C.
form appear? Or you don't want it?
No, you can have it. Form space EC dash 1.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
You write it out, I'm sorry.
No, you've got it perfect right there. You've got it exactly what I was thinking.
Okay.
I
All
like
right.
trails.
Okay. And this was the easy form. So what I told them, Neil, was if this reminds me of policy committee work, we could spend a couple meetings on these forms because they're so rich. So we started with the easiest one. So is there anything under the certification besides the circle 1? That needs tweaking?
Oh, it looks pretty good. I like a revised date in there, Neil.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll put
I like
down
the projection.
7/6.
Well, no, I know, I like the projection.
Well, I was an optimist, I guess.
There you go.
I think, all right. All right, so assuming this is amended to say inquiry request for advice and/or counsel, we remove the line, this is office held or position. This is Form EC-C:1. We add an email line, we add a circle 1 next to what we're certifying that they are. Does someone want to make a motion to accept that amended form, or do we want to wait and see it rewritten first?
I think you probably want to adopt this whole thing as a package.
Okay,
And if at the end of the meeting we haven't reached that point, then we can go back and, because it may be that we come back to this and decide to make a
could be,
change.
fair, yep. Okay, all right, so we're done with that form
For the moment.
for the moment, yeah, exactly. All right, so do we want to go with,
And then we'll do the same thing on the Form C:2. We'll take out title of office held or position, or does
Do we-
that still need to be in there?
we don't have,
I
that
don't,
form's
I don't
already
have
accepted.
that one.
Okay, this
So
would have been.
that one's already, I mean, that one was already created, not by
Correct.
us.
That was,
So we
that's
would have to
correct.
modify it.
So, I mean, I think if you're gonna, to your point, if you're gonna have the certification, the circle 1, the form number,
Yeah,
but you do wanna leave your office held,
All right, so
because
you-
that's required.
okay, all right, so that would be at the top, okay.
So,
Are we talking now about the form that says
That already
request for
existed.
written
Yeah.
advisory opinion?
Correct.
Right, the one that already
Okay.
existed, so
and so we are adding also the form number to that,
inquiry-
correct?
adding the
and
form
the-
number to that one, correct.
And that would be Form C2, C:2.
Form
Two.
EC-1,
E-
Dot-
EC-C:2,
C:2, got it.
yep. And that one doesn't need to change much, right, except for,
You want
we're gonna-
Email
you want
address.
email address,
Yeah.
and then we probably want to say inquiry on that one as well, right?
Yes, I think that would be appropriate. Inquiry request for written advisory opinion.
And since we have the office title position, we don't need the circle 1 on that one,
Okay.
right, because they put in the
If
title
they're
above,
listing it, right.
right? Okay.
So you're just basically adding the word and putting the form number on top?
Email and the form
And
number.
email address.
Okay.
Yep. All right,
Okay, good.
so,
Okay, that's 2.
right, so I'm thinking, before we do the FAQs and the flyer piece, which is great, probably we want to do one of the process ones. Right, so the process for handling inquiries, complaints, that's probably the meat of the,
That's this one?
yeah. Yep.
Process, this,
Uh-huh.
So we're all on the, says at the top, where Ethics Committee process for handling inquiries, advisory opinions and complaints, that's the one?
Yes.
One page that we're dealing with?
Yep.
Okay.
Right. And that does not have an amendment date on it.
Can I make a bold suggestion on this one, because I just got to B. We had a discussion, I think it was our second agenda item, that Luke had gotten some information at the webinar for 91A that may be contrary to what we were imagining of how we would move forward with our process, so we may need a little bit more clarity on that before we can really
Good point.
weigh in our
Yep,
process.
that is true. That is true. I mean, the one thing, so we could go to hearings then, I guess, because also to your point is, we can't do FAQs till we know what we're doing, right? We gotta
And
have the-
some of the, I mean, some of this document I think we can discuss, there's just a section of it that we don't know, what
Yeah.
we don't know about going
Right.
into non-public, like,
So the concern is we can't go into non-public as a matter of course. It has to be a risk of severe impact to someone's reputation, not trivial. And so
Say again?
there's some additional questions about, can we go into public just to open the documents and then decide if it's public or non-public? So Luke still has some questions around that.
Does he have questions, or does he have
Oh, he has
information?
questions. No,
I
that was
shared the
a,
information prior to you getting here, but what the information was in the briefing or the webinar. I raised the question specifically, and after they had discussed having closed, non-public sessions. And they made the point that it had to be, in order to use the reputational harm as a reason to go into non-public, the harm had to be considered severe, not trivial. And then, so I followed up with an email question to them, or an online question to them about, well, talk further about that. And they gave an example. It wasn't very helpful. They said, well, if you're an attorney for the town and you're being accused of stealing money from the town, that would certainly have the potential for damaging your reputation. On the other hand, if you're a member of a committee and you're being accused of not having, signed off on the minutes or something, that would be trivial, and wouldn't be a reason to go into non-public. And then we had a discussion after that, well, how do we know? How do we distinguish between, another thing is so there's one portion of what we do that would require non-public, but if someone's asking for advice and counsel and they're not, there's no, I think this person did this thing, then what is the reason for that discussion to go into non-public? But we don't have any identification on any of our documents coming in at this point, so part of our discussion was, well, how do we handle that? How do we sort which is in which pile until we open them?
So can't we go into non-public on the assumption that there may be significant reputational damage? Okay? Look at them in non-public, make that determination, and then either continue them in non-public or go back into public session. Because otherwise,
It's
we would be
discovered.
doing the damage.
Right, and we did discuss that, and I think that yes, what I was saying is, I think there's a way to navigate that, but I do think we're gonna have to differentiate somehow as they're coming in between what's an inquiry that's not, that, doesn't have any connection to someone's reputation.
What would happen if the chairman opened each of these upon receipt and made a determination
Of severity.
of severity?
So we
Okay.
discussed that as well. The concern was at what point does it become discoverable? If it's now a public document because we opened it and it's no longer sealed, is that something a right-to-know person has access to?
meaning,
But-
if you don't go into non-public to open it, or if you,
Right.
then it's a part of
The minutes and
Well,
the meeting.
You can't pull it back in.
is it though, so for example, if we brought in a letter from someone and we opened the letter today that we received that there's no requirement to attach that letter to the minutes, right?
But even if there isn't, your point is, as soon as you've opened it, it is a public document, whether or not you include it in the minutes.
Okay. So who keeps those documents from these committees?
whoever keeps our stuff, I don't know if the town clerk,
So like, for
what the process
example,
is.
you know, let's say we got correspondence, and we are in a public meeting, and we open the correspondence. I'm required as a secretary to say, you know, we moved to open correspondence, we received a letter from such and such, read the contents of the letter, had a brief discussion about the contents of the letter, you know, moved on to the next agenda item. The fact that we open something in our public session is then discoverable. It's subject to right to know. Anybody could say, hey, I want to see a copy of the letter that you opened as a part of your public meeting on July 5th. Please, you know, send me a copy of that letter and your discussion regarding the letter. If we go into non-public, then open our correspondence, read it, review it, decide this could have, you know, significant harm, this is, you know, relatively innocent, we're going to keep this part in non-public, we're going to address this part in public session, we come out of public session, discuss that. Anything that we've sealed in non-public, anything we've opened, it continues to be protected,
So
from my understanding.
I think you're right. So how about this? And I think it may be skirting the edges, but is the best reasonable solution. When we receive mail, the chairman does not open it, the chairman brings it to the meeting. We go into non-public for the purpose of determining whether or not there is going to be reputational, or serious reputational damage. We open the letters. None of them, for example, in this case, do that. We then come out of non-public session and we announce we have received whatever it is, and we describe it, and it becomes part of our record. You attach a copy to the minutes. If we determine that in fact there is serious reputational damage, then I don't know if we would come out of non-session and say, at that point, I don't know whether
That's
we
the
announce the
piece.
name or
Yes,
not.
that's the piece.
But I would say at that point, we do not. We say this, we have received a complaint that would result in serious reputational damage, and we will be considering this in non-public session. And then what I don't know is if we determine, let's say it's a request for advice and consent, not written, okay, so it's C1, okay, that I don't know whether we make that public or not.
And that, like, that's the part of it that I think we need clarity on to understand what our process would be.
I'm sorry, which part don't you understand if we need to make public or not?
We've determined that serious reputational harm
May it be affected, right?
may have been affected, so we consider it in non-public session.
Right.
We've gotten a request for this advice, so at the end of our non-public session, we come to some sort of a conclusion,
Right.
okay? We presumably will seal the minutes of the non-public session, okay? But we have this request. Do we then provide an answer to the individual, okay? And that answer is part of our, I assume, part of our sealed minutes. So nobody knows that a request for an inquiry was received. Nobody knows what our answer is, except the individual who addressed the inquiry to us.
My question is, do we report out, like, all right, and I'm gonna use the Board of Selectmen as my frame of reference here, because it's probably the meeting that I've most watched. You know, so we're going into non-public session for a personnel-related item under 91A, you know, A and C. They go into non-public, they come out, and then they're like, all right, we're in non-public session for that issue, we came out at such and such a time. I don't know if we would come out in non-public and say we received 6 complaints, 4 of which we will continue in public session, you know, 2 of which we have determined based on vote that could have, you know, significant impact to reputation, so we will be reviewing those in, you know, we'll be managing those in non-public session. Yeah, I don't know if that's the way that you do it
One
or
minute,
not.
But that certainly seems reasonable.
One way to handle, or to assist in that, is to number each thing you get in, 01, 02, 03, and then you could reference it without
Yeah,
identification of
exactly.
any kind other than our number.
But that's the piece of it, like
To say that we, well, and my point is I think I think it's dangerous ground to have no acknowledgement at all that we received a complaint.
Yes,
Sure.
I agree
think
with
there
you.
needs to be something that says we
Yes.
received it. What we do with it after that fact is a whole nother matter.
Okay, but I agree with you that we need to identify these and refer to them in our minutes. But I'd like to go one step beyond Eileen. I agree with her. What do we do when we've gotten this inquiry, it adversely affects somebody's reputation, and then do we respond to them?
I think you'd have to, because adversely affecting it may be a justified adverse impact, right? It may be at the end of the
If it's an
day.
inquiry and not a complaint, we can say, this is too specific, or this is sliding into complaint, so this is really complaint form, or could you make a more generic answer, right, for inquiries?
Because I was overwhelmed by this problem and I couldn't figure out a really good way to do it, in this process, in number one, if the matter is a request for advice, that's the inquiry, C1, on an ethical issue, and the issues raised do not affect anyone's reputation, I would have to add the word serious. The matter will be discussed in public session with the inquirer present if he or she wishes to do so, and the committee's opinion recorded in the minutes and provided to the inquirer directly. The committee will not consider requests for advice that may seriously affect someone's reputation.
And I think that was kind of the
And that's,
intent of those two documents, right? An inquiry is not supposed to be specific.
if you're asking for an inquiry, you're asking some general question.
Right.
You shouldn't be asking whether Selectman A violated the rules. That shouldn't be an inquiry. That should be a complaint.
Complaint.
And that would be the job of the committee to
decide.
distinguish between and say this is a complaint disguised as an inquiry,
But
and
we
we're not
would-
going to accept it as such.
And we would reject this.
Right, you would send it back and say,
Say,
here's
you
your
need to
complaint
file a
form.
complaint.
Yes.
Right, if that's your intention.
That was my thinking, and that we should not deal with complaints in the form of an
Of
inquiry.
Okay.
course, yeah,
Sure.
agreement.
I mean, that's the way I went. And I did the same thing with respect to written advisory opinions, Form C2. The committee will not consider requests for written advisory opinion that may significantly and adversely affect someone's reputation. That's the way I dealt with the problem. And then if we have a complaint,
And perhaps we could, maybe it's just a wordsmithing
Oh, yeah.
thing, because I think adding some language to say, we will not consider requests for a written advisory that contain so much specificity as to clearly identify, whereas if someone were to put forward a scenario that, if you knew who the person they were talking about was, that you might assume there was reputational harm, but they're not identifying them, I think we could still deal with that.
okay, John Jones, a resident of town, submits a C1 inquiry, and his submission contains reputational damage. What do we
Of an
do?
inquiry, well, in that case, I think that's where we would start the meeting by saying this is a complaint filed in the form of an inquiry, because the inquiry is supposed to is supposed to be relieved of that level of specificity.
Agreed, no problem there. Now, what do we do? First of all, are we in public session or non-public session? The answer is we're in non-public
Non-public.
session. We've made that determination. We take that complaint and return it to him. We seal the minutes, and that complaint is not public. Inquiry is not public.
Well, there may be an inquiry number, but it wouldn't be, the information wouldn't be public.
The name
Right.
of the inquirer, neither the name of the inquirer nor the names of any people mentioned.
Well, in that case, I think what we would do is make a determination that it was not a valid inquiry. That's the bar. It's not an inquiry, it's a complaint. And therefore, you can't.
And was not filed in the
Was
proper
not filed
form so
appropriately,
that we could
right.
consider it in non-public.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, Sam.
How does that work out, Eileen?
Well, I'm playing it through. So in our scenario, is the person hanging out in the lobby? Are they you know, watching from home, we go into blank camera, and now we gotta figure out a way to get back in touch with them? Are we picking up the phone and calling them? Are we, you know, like, how do we communicate that in a way that continues to protect?
First of all, anyone, the Inquirer and anyone else can come to these
Yes.
meetings where we then go into non-public, so they leave the room.
Yep.
Okay. We've done just what Luke said. The meeting, we finished our meeting, and we have voted 5-0 that this inquiry is in the form of a complaint and misplaced.
Then give them the option, do you want this just to be an inquiry?
Well, no, the question now is what do we communicate, and how do we communicate?
Right, and I think that's Eileen's question, right? And so I think if we're rejecting it, someone,
The chairman would write a letter and saying, your complaint has been rejected because it's in the form of an inquiry. If you wish to continue, kindly,
Would we not add a block on here saying that it was accepted as an inquiry by the committee? You know, so after we've received it, have a box on here that we check off to say this one was accepted or rejected.
we could.
That way you could just send them back the original form rejected, and there you, that's,
but they need to know
With
why it was
recommendations, with
rejected and
recommendations, yeah.
what they need to
So there still
do.
needs to be a communication. I think that was
Sure.
Eileen's point, right? And we can't, especially if, this isn't gonna happen, but say we had 6 inquiries in a week. We can't come back and say, 3 of these were valid, 2 of them not, because the author of those original inquiries doesn't know which bucket they fell into. So there's a loop that we have to,
And how do you continue to keep that part of the correspondence, protected information?
right, right.
I'm missing,
so the.
If
So
they're
would it
sitting
be a
out in,
phone call?
if they're sitting out in the waiting room,
we're not
That's easy.
we're not communicating with them in the waiting room. We have come out of non-public.
Yep.
This is my concept.
sure,
The chairman has been authorized by a vote to communicate. I assume that, well, I know that we have the address and the email address. Why can't she simply send a letter to this person?
Once I
or
send a letter,
return
it's a
the
public
form?
document, right? It's discoverable if I send an email to someone.
Why?
That's okay.
If it's
Well-
done in non-public?
But,
But the email's not done in
traceable.
non-public.
It's trackable.
but the response would also be generic, right? So in that case, okay, so they get a discovery saying that the board rejected this as an inquiry and suggests that you file a complaint. That's
So
very
that
clear.
means as far as the world is concerned, Miss X filed a complaint, filed an inquiry. Okay, everybody knows that now, public, it's published in the, where in the world? Is that a problem?
I don't think so.
Is that, the fact that they...
I don't know,
Does that deter people?
I don't think so.
I don't know.
It's a public process. I don't see how you can, again, right to know establishes that people have a right to know what the business before the town is.
But if I want some form of confidentiality, even coming to ask the question, I don't want people to, you know, let's say I'm an employee and I'm concerned about retaliation. I don't know, pick a scenario where someone's
Right.
afraid of talking about an issue, right?
Even though the issue is generic.
Even if the issue is generic, if I am petrified of retaliation and I'm coming to you because I don't know where else to go, and I'm bringing you, I'm a director of HR, so,
Right.
you know,
I'm
this is
just- I'm
this is
running
the
the process
sea,
in
this
my
is
head
the
how that
sea
might
that I
work.
swim in, right? So, and I'm concerned about, you know, I don't know the answer to this, and I'm trying to understand, is there a way to protect it coming in and it going out, even if we have to reject? And I understand your point that we could say simply, we read your request, it did not meet the threshold, you know, and so if you'd like to file a complaint, you know, we'd recommend that you do that. But do we put people in a position, you know, I'm also thinking about, and forgive me because it's been a long day and I'm probably not going to be able to deliver this with the eloquence that I'd like to. However, I think we're assuming a level of sophistication for the people coming in, looking for assistance that may or may not be there.
Right, and counsel doesn't usually mean you give me a form and I hand you back a form, right? Counsel usually suggests an interactive conversation, and at one point, we were talking about we would have a non-public with a person to sort of tease out their question. And if it's just accepted, not accepted, here's the answer, we've kind of cut out that advice.
And I don't know the right answer on this, but I'm just trying to make sure that the process,
The selectmen, when they have non-publics, often have a variety of people included in those non-publics, not just the selectmen. For example, they'll have the police chief in if there's an
Right.
officer involved and there's a background question, okay? And everybody knows the police chief went in there. So that would mean that the inquirer would be known, unless there's some way to have the inquirer come in without that being known.
And I have to say, although I respectfully understand that there might be circumstances where people are uncomfortable, especially in some of the more egregious ethical violations, you know, whether or not I went on a fishing trip to Alaska or something, I don't know. But on the other hand, the right to know of the public has to be, is the balance of the law. And for someone to come in with an inquiry, I think the complaint, I understand why you need to protect that. But if they're just asking questions and we've gone through whatever process to say this is a bona fide question, if they say, I don't want my name associated with any of this, well, there's not really a way, for example, right now to do that with the selectmen. If I was to go want to complain to the selectmen about something in town, but I felt like one of them was, you know, I was gonna be under threat in some way, there's not really a procedure for me to, you know, confidentially.
But here's, I have just a thought here. What happens if, since we have these forms and we're saying in effect, you gotta fill out the right form, and if you're really gonna knock somebody, you have to file a complaint.
Sure.
What would happen if our procedure said, before you file any paperwork, speak to the chairman? Okay? Talk to the chairman. Now, that's confidential, right? Because it's not a meeting. The chairman will give you advice. So Miss A comes in, she's the one who you said is very concerned, she works for the town or something. And even though her question is generic, okay, she doesn't want, under your hypothesis, she doesn't want it known. She comes in and she speaks to the chair. And she explains the situation in great detail with all the names and so forth. And chair says, look, you can't come in with an inquiry for two reasons. First, it's going to be known, and second, it's the wrong form. You got to come in with a complaint or a written opinion, wherever it is. At that point, the person is protected and knows what to do. Okay? And then that person is going to have to make the decision, because now she knows the correct form, that it's going to be known that she put in an inquiry. It's going to be known that she asked for, she's a town employee, she asked for written advisory. It's going to be known that she filed a complaint. So we can avoid some harm to the very sensitive individual, but we can't avoid it completely. At some point, it's going to be known that she filed a complaint or she asked for an inquiry. Because if she asks for an inquiry or written advisory, that's going to be public.
So.
Because under our
I
thing,
understand your point, and it's well made. The concern it raises for me, however, is that what you do then is you establish a gatekeeping position for the
Yes.
committee through one person.
yes,
Who has no higher or lesser expertise than the other members of the committee, and I would be concerned about, you know, what happens then, what happens if there's a disagreement at that level?
the chair will make mistakes. There's no question about it. She's a human being. And that's life.
So,
You can't design, because if you want it to be 5 people, and God knows 5 people can make a mistake too.
Of course.
If you
And
want it
it's
to
a
be
meeting.
5 people, then you have these right-to-know problems.
I understand, and I do understand the balance.
I am concerned about the gatekeeping as well. I think we have a loaded 15 topics into this one topic, and I'm trying to parse it out into things. If it's that we're saying there's no longer an expectation of privacy if you do an inquiry, is what I'm hearing. That's one piece.
Or an advisory,
Advisory, right?
because there's no significant adverse consequence to somebody's reputation.
Right, so that's one piece, but, you know, it's been a month since we met, so maybe I'm off, but I thought we had said, once we open something, we said we'll allow that person to come in and talk to us, and if we've now saying we're gonna read it in isolation and we're gonna rule on it, they've lost that dialogue.
Because I think the difference between the two, Wendy, is information that we had when we first had the conversation about what our process was gonna be and the information that we have now about non-public and our ability to do that. From my perspective, not to, I'm gonna try to take 30,000 feet and go back into the weeds with it. I wonder if there's a way in our form to say not only be specific, but, we're asking them to be specifically vague,
Right, right,
right?
right.
I mean, that's the long and short of it. It's like, give us as much information as you can in a way that's not gonna tie it to anybody,
Right,
and
Right.
that's a skill
right.
that,
That probably we don't all have, right? So
So
it's,
aren't you conflict?
well, it's an oxymoron. Be specifically vague.
No,
So
no,
be
no, but
really
before you were saying-
specific about what you want us to look at, but don't give us any identifying information.
Well,
Ish.
I'm not working with this group.
Right.
If that's your standard, I can't meet it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Because on the form,
Right.
in order for us to be able to have a conversation about it, like, we'll reject their request for inquiry if they're not vague enough. That's what I'm hearing.
Right.
Right? But the form itself says, be as specific as you possibly can be in describing the incident that brings you here. So which one are we going with?
Yeah, I think to your point, you'd have to modify your form to say, be as specific as possible while leaving out personally identifying information such that we don't end up with a situation where somebody is preemptively charged, accused.
The other thing would be on the form to request a public or non-public hearing or a
audience.
session.
And just, I think there was some concern about, we can't allow the public into non-public. I will tell you, we do that all the time in the school board. If a parent has a concern, an employee has a concern, it's not, their name's not on the agenda, but we have a non-public with a parent. And then we take that parent into non-public and we work things out. And we come out and we say, we had a non-public with a parent and we've resolved, we voted or didn't vote. That person's name is not defined, but they have the opportunity to come in and discuss things with us. Which,
Explain again how that works.
so if we get a letter or a parent went through, they talked to the teacher, talked to the principal, talked to the superintendent, and they now want audience with us. The superintendent will put it on the agenda that we have a non-public parent concern.
Now, how did the superintendent learn about,
Because the escalation policy is you start with the teacher, then you go to the principal, then you go to the
no,
superintendent.
it was oral, it was all oral.
Right. Oral or letter or however they interact.
But if a letter is written, isn't that public? If I
If
wanted
it-
to,
yeah.
what complaints did the superintendent receive from parents?
Right.
I'd
So
like a copy
typically-
of every letter.
Typically, they go in and meet with the superintendent, the superintendent calls them, right?
Okay, but the superintendent is an individual, and that would work if the individual, as I said, came in and spoke to the chairman. But it doesn't work if the individual comes in not to the superintendent, but to the school board, because
Right.
that's a public meeting.
If they come to the school board, we say, we police the process, have you spoken to the superintendent? And then if they start talking, we go, you know what, that's really a non-public conversation, so, and we would
The
adjust.
difference, though, that you're looking at, right, is discussions related to a minor. That's protected information. Discussions related to an employee, that's protected information. What we're talking about here
Is not protected.
does not fit the criteria for either of those. So using that as our litmus test
I
isn't
see.
necessarily
I
gonna
guess what I
work.
was saying is, we are able to bring the public into a non-public. to have a
I
discussion.
think you can bring, so one of the things is, I think maybe providing the option to meet with the committee non-publicly to discuss an inquiry, as a first step, might be a way to resolve the question.
But I thought we couldn't do that legally.
Right, so the problem, it goes back to your concern,
If
is
the
we can't
employee,
do.
or not the employee, excuse me, if the resident of the town, I'm suggesting that they would make the request based on an assumption of harm or based on their personal feeling of threat or whatever. Again, I
Yeah.
don't know that that's possible or if that violates the law just on the other
Right,
side.
and that actually, to your point, okay, you're talking me back. So we can't have a private counsel because then we're forcing regular business into non-public just to make someone feel.
Okay.
Here's the language that I wrote, and I'm just trying to recall whether, or ask you guys whether this makes sense. This is there an ethics issue that concerns you? So this is something that will,
Which form you want?
It starts with is big capital.
Okay,
Questions
got
from
it, okay,
individuals
got it.
considering filing?
number 2, if you have an ethics concern, are we all on the same
Yep.
page?
Which one is
Yes.
Is there an ethics? Okay.
If you are a town elected official, a town employee, a town board member, or a town resident, and you have a concern about an ethical issue, please feel to discuss it with the Ethics Committee. These concerns should be of a general nature and not related to an identifiable person. Okay? The committee will interpret the code and give you its opinion and guidance. To start the process, fill out Form A, C1, request for advice, etc., and mailed it in a sealed envelope without a return name or address to.
So my concern is discuss it with us, but we're saying we'll get a form and we're gonna give you back something that doesn't feel like a discussion. But what I'm also hearing is we can't do that in non-public because there's no significant harm.
Right.
But can they come here and talk to us about their issues in public?
Yes,
So
they can.
Back to, so if we circle back to the original process, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll go back in, based on this, right? So it would be, they've, you know, we have a lockbox in the lobby, we have a mail collection, we convene a meeting, we immediately go into non-public to open the correspondence.
Right.
Understanding that in that bucket of correspondence could be things that could potentially harm and stuff that's completely innocuous. We process the correspondence, we decide this is the bucket that no one, you know, shall not be named. This is gonna be done in non-public. Then we've also received 4 appropriate inquiries of a general nature that we can discuss in non-public.
That we can
Yeah,
discuss in public.
That we can discuss in public. We come out, you know, we do whatever business we need to do about setting up for complaints and, you know, all that stuff in non-public. We come out of non-public. My question is, what can we say about the stuff that we did in non-public so that it becomes part of a record in a safe way?
Right.
And then we have the general discussion about those inquiries
Right.
for
Wouldn't,
advice.
wouldn't we simply say, in non-public and seal the minutes, these two have to be done in non-public, they're
Yep.
complaints? And
Yes.
remember, at this point, aren't we assuming that some people have incorrectly filled out the forms?
I'm
Sure.
open. Yeah, that people.
Okay, so we would say that, I think, that we would reject 2 of the 6, let's call them inquiries.
Sure.
2 of the 6 inquiries really need to be complaints. We would reject those. They would be sealed. I think the chair would write that letter. That would be sealed, I hope. Is that possible?
I don't know. So that's question one,
Send it, you mean?
is if we send correspondence out from
A sealed meeting.
a sealed meeting.
Nope.
That's inquiry 1, right?
Yeah, it's not sealed anymore. Whatever you
It's
send out is
It
public.
becomes public, right?
You
So
send it.
it's
You
how
sure?
do we,
Yes.
it's how do we communicate that in a way that keeps it protected?
Back to my initial comments at one of our first meetings about the state process versus our process. They have a protection in there. You sign off on the form when you submit a complaint that you agree as the complainant that all of the discussion will remain confidential until the board, the ethics committee, makes a determination that it's no longer confidential. And I don't like that. In
Because
order
how
to
do
get an
you-
audience, you
like-
have to.
But how
But
does
I
it-
understand why to a degree, I understand why they're doing it. to
How does
stop
that prevent
it.
somebody from inquiring, putting in a right-to-know inquiry? The fact that the complainant wants it kept secret is not,
No, I'm
Okay.
saying that it's in the policy of the board that everything that comes in is confidential and only released to anybody by the agreement of the board, not the individual filing. So I
Individual
couldn't,
doesn't have a
I would be
Sounds so
prohibited under the law, according to this, and subject to a misdemeanor offense, should I go out and put it on Facebook, for example, my complaint that I filed with the state. Right. And so I think that's too far in one direction, because now then you could just effectively shut down all complaints by burying them and never seeing the light of day. But on the other side of that, where is the line to?
See, I think we're at a point of really specific nuts and bolts kind of advice that we need, right? Because we're circling around this one issue, is how do we communicate with people,
Make us user-friendly.
right? How do we communicate with people? Because if we're doing complaint, like, we've got to notify parties to come in, to have to, like, I think we need to understand how we can do that in a way that protects the information. So that's like point A. Point B, the simpler one is if somebody fills this out in a way that, allows us to discuss it, and we can come out of non-public and say, well, we received an inquiry related to this general topic. And, based on that, our advice is this and that.
Right,
That's an easier one.
sure.
My concern is if this isn't well-written, or is written, I shouldn't say well-written, it's written in a way that could, either should be a complaint, or we can't really get into because they were too specific. How do we then communicate that back to the individuals, right?
So I do think, so it's in non-public, it's sealed. If I then send a public email to that person saying, this is really a complaint, you need to fill out this form, and it's generic, the fact that that's public, all it's done is out the person who put in the
Yes.
inquiry, right? And so I think that's okay.
What about a phone call?
Yep.
To have the conversation
Yeah,
with the individual, and that way it's non-public and non-trackable.
right. And
But
not
they get the information that they need.
Right.
You can do a 91A for phone records.
What's that?
But
That would, that wouldn't have the conversation.
No, but
But it would mean that Wendy's
connect.
personal call to complainant
Yeah.
X would be known. On the other hand, Wendy probably has 500 calls, one of whom is X,
Yep.
and there are many other people in town, so it wouldn't necessarily provide
I
any
have
useful
500
information.
calls, dude, I'm stepping down. I did not have the time.
No, your personal life, you have
yeah.
500 calls, and this is a 500 first.
But so I think we're at the point of like really specific nuts and bolts. How do
Yes.
we communicate in a way that keeps what we need to keep protected,
Correct.
but yet gets the process intact, right?
Right, I
That-
feel like we're very close.
Yeah.
It's just that nuts and bolts piece to your point. And so, I believe that, so either we need a bunch of legal questions answered, or, we take our best effort. But I believe, I've had non-public conversations with parents that then I can send a generic email back as the chair of the school board, right? And so that's public.
Yes.
But the whole content of what we did in non-public stays sealed.
But that works as long as we're willing to ignore Eileen's concern for the faint-hearted
Sure.
inquirer. Because,
So that's a school board thing too. We'll have people say, I don't want to talk in public comment because I don't want you to know things. I will counsel them and say, but you have to. If it's big enough a concern that you need to talk before the board, you need to talk before the board if it's not protected, right? I mean, that's feelings at that point.
And I think also there's a balance for the complainant and the person being complained about potentially, that it's supposed to be a public process, that's
Right.
part of the whole thing, so to, although some people may be, limited situations where they're concerned about their own personal safety, for example, or, something like that, I think that's gonna be far and away the exception, and we can't, to your point, we can't plan for every eventuality. We have to look at what's the most likely of the things that we're gonna see here. And I don't personally believe we're gonna see a lot of, really scandalous and inflammatory complaints about people's reputations. Maybe.
let me give you a hypothetical. Two town employees. The town auctions off equipment from time to time. One town employee bought the equipment or the real estate or whatever it is. Selectmen approved the sale, and it was a real bargain. Another town employee hears about this and is ripped. Okay? But that second town employee has a professional relationship with the other town employee, doesn't want to file a complaint, but wants to know if the selectmen acted appropriately by approving this, what, in this person's term, bargain sale to somebody else, okay? So the person comes in and raises the issue before us. The very fact that that person has raised the issue will be known to a whole bunch of people, other town employees.
That's
For
not an
example.
inquiry, though, because you had to be specific.
The question would be, can the selectmen approve a bargain sale of equipment to a town employee? Okay? That's about as generic as you can get. But everybody in town is going to know, not everybody, a lot of town employees are going to know, hey, the complainant is really talking about X. Because we all know that X got that whatever at a bargain price. The selectmen approved it.
So the question would evolve to us around an ethics complaint, because
That is a
there's a
complaint.
separate process. Already, there's a policy about purchasing in town and employees and all of that, that's on the website. But on the town website.
That town employees can purchase?
On purchasing, and that, what I'm saying is I think that's covered by other policies for town employees, they have to be approved. I think that the conflict of interest in your case, though, would be, should the town be selling to its own employees, where they may be, now in a position of conflict of interest, because, as you said,
Well, that's the ethical issue that we're supposed to decide,
But we
right?
can't without specifics. You can't say, I don't know if it's a bargain because it was a computer and that computer is no longer necessary.
We're not deciding whether it was a bargain. That was a given. That was what the individual said. There was a bargain sale to a town employee. The selectmen approved it. Is that ethical?
There's no way to answer that question.
you would have, again, if they
You'd
wanted
have
to
to-
file a complaint and say it was not ethical, because what I would answer that question is, well, it depends, right, on the specifics of the case. A bargain in what way? Was it an unfair bargain? Did they inappropriately use their position
Did they
to
not
leverage
advertise
that
it that-
bargain?
Was
Those are different questions. Then, did the town offer publicly in Craigslist this thing, nobody wanted it, and they came in and bought it? That's
But how do I even
different.
get to the point of asking? If asking is gonna out me, how do I even get my answer?
Honestly, I think at some point, we have to have an expectation. So I was involved in grievance processes forever and counseled thousands, literally thousands of people to say, you've gotta do one of two things. You can make an inquiry, you can go and talk to people privately. But if you want it resolved, it's a formal process, and formal processes require public discussion. You can't isolate your complaint and
But
protect
we're not
yourself.
complaining yet, we're just trying to figure out
Exactly.
if, we're not complaining yet. I don't even know what I don't know, I just know that this doesn't feel right, but I don't know why,
Sort of, well.
right? Like that's the
But we do
point
know
that we're
why, in
at.
this case, in the case that's before us right now, we're talking about somebody got a deal that I, as an ordinary town citizen, didn't have access to because whatever. And it's not fair that they got this deal, they got it special privilege because they were a town employee,
But
theoretically.
isn't that something that we could address in our response? And that is, as you said, the answer to your question depends. If A, then B. If C, then D.
Right, then, and it may be that you have a complaint.
It may be that as a result of our advice, you should bring forward a complaint.
Right.
Because you know things that you haven't, about the specifics that you haven't told us, because it's a generic inquiry.
Right. But again, it doesn't guarantee that it's that complaint will be sustained at the end of the process, because we're not gonna have all the information until we go through a hearing.
Correct.
But can I even ask the question without outing myself?
My perspective is, we shouldn't be in the position of protecting people who are making what are public inquiries from having their inquiries made public. I think there's an ameliorating effect on having to step up to the microphone and say, here is my concern.
Then the real consequence of that is, because most people are very sensitive to these issues and don't want to rock their professional employment boat, that we will deter a significant proportion of people who would otherwise make inquiries. It takes a really hard, self-confident individual to raise these issues if your standard of publicity is what I have to undergo.
I'm gonna put it to you from this perspective. So I am the Director of Employee Services for a state agency. Prior to that job, I was an Employee Assistance Program Counselor for 14 years in state government. So I had the type of confidentiality that is consistent with attorney-client privilege in state government by statute. So if people came to me, the only things I would have to violate that confidentiality over were harm to self and others, okay? I was extremely busy with people trying to understand whether or not they had, enough to move forward with. A lot of the people who came to me came for information, just information that they were never going to act on. The amount of people who actually move forward to complaint from information is pretty small. And I know that because the amount of people who actually, even presenting all the information, were like, no, I'm not going to make a complaint, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. I just need to know if I'm crazy. I need to know if there's something here that, this is bothering me. I need to know if this is right.
So would there not be another path for dealing with, so what just occurred to me is one way to be able to handle those sorts of things where people want to remain completely anonymous is to have an anonymous question line where they can email questions to the committee with whatever information they choose to provide, and we can feed them back our best understanding based on what they sent us, suggesting a direction.
I kind of like that opportunity.
As opposed to a form.
Right, what I'm suggesting is, is an alternative to these formal processes. If all you want to do is ask, hey, I've just got an academic question about ethics, well, then you can send this, and we don't have to have any identifying information, who you are or whatever. And then I don't know.
But and with the disclaimer that we're making a guess
Based on the
based
information.
on whatever you're providing in
we have
front of us.
In front of us,
Yep.
and it is not a determination, it's just informal advice.
I really like that idea, Lou, because I like the idea of being able to, because there are people who are gonna be okay with filling it out and saying, yeah, I just want to ask a question, and being okay with their information. If there's gonna be, I think, some traffic on, I don't know the answer to this, but I don't want anyone to know. And trying to find a way, and it could be that they come in because an email would be traceable, but if they dropped a question in the box, right?
So
No
let's,
names attached to it.
let's get the process. The chairman goes to the box and picks up all these inquiries and brings them to the meeting. All of them are public, they're all anonymous, okay? We do our stuff, and we come to some conclusion, and that is made public at the meeting and probably in our minutes, both the anonymous question and the response, okay? And the person who's interested will read our minutes and get the answer.
Yep.
Okay, now let's talk about how that can be abused.
Many ways.
Many ways. Many ways.
So this is public now. So we've got this anonymous suggestion box or whatever it is.
Basically, yep.
Yep. And somebody comes in and says, what happens if employee, Miss Smith, is Miss Smith acting ethically if she did this bargain sale? Or are the selectmen acting ethically? Now, that's public.
Sure.
But that's practically giving people a form,
No,
a
but we're gonna
public
still
forum for
open up
slander.
Dropbox contents in non-public and sort which ones we can answer publicly or not, right? And then we can, when we come out, we'll say we had 2 or 3 that had public identifying questions that we just can't answer publicly. And that's it. We can't go back to those people because they didn't choose to give us contact information.
Right, but I mean, we would have to make the call that these are not formal complaints, it's an
Yep.
informal
No,
inquiry.
these are inquiries.
And that therefore, if in the opinion of the committee, as, when we receive these inquiries, this was a, scurrilous and inflammatory commentary on someone disguised as an inquiry,
Sure.
we would not respond at all. Or we would respond and say, we don't believe this is an appropriate question for the terms of an informal inquiry.
So let's see what's
Because then we're not
happening.
backing it up.
Instead of people mailing in the form, they put the form in the Dropbox anonymously. chairman picks that up, brings that to the meeting, we go into non-public session.
To be clear, we're not talking about all of the forms being able to come in.
We're only talking about the inquiry form.
Just, well, no, what I was talking about, to be clear, was a separate not a formal inquiry where somebody's identifying who they are, but rather, I just want to ask an informal question without any association to me. My name's not associated with it in
It's
any
still an
way.
inquiry, though.
But it's just a general question about ethics. Like the ethics corner, we used to have the counselor's corner in our newsletter, and you just send in questions, and he'd pick some and answer them, and pick others, and like, no, I'm not getting into that one.
Can
There's
we
no-
do-
Sure, there's no obligation that we respond to every question,
I
right?
understand that. That's as far as the inquirer is concerned. As far as the statute is concerned, the right to know statute, can we take all of these forms as we suggested, before we open them, go into non-public, open them in non-public, put them into the two piles, ignore the pile that is scurrilous, and deal with the pile that is, quote, appropriate?
I think we'd have to come out, for just this and I'm gonna call this a informal inquiry
Yep.
versus our formal inquiry, right?
Or anonymous inquiry.
I think it would be the same process. We'd come out in non-public, we'd say we received 5 informal inquiries. Of the 5, 3 we are able to address and answer. And here's the inquiry, here's the answer.
So at that point, we would say there are 5 that came in, and in our non-public session, we are going to exclude these 2. The other 3 we will deal when we're back in public session,
Yes.
right?
Okay, so the scurrilous ones have just been circular filed.
Yep.
Right, and my understanding is you don't have to attach them. Now, may they potentially be discoverable by someone?
No,
through
because
a
if you,
process?
you seal the
We would
minutes for the
seal-
non-public.
And restrict.
So,
And-
if that's the case, and we're just talking generally here, isn't this, haven't we fulfilled the obligation that we have? The ethics committee, this is under C,
Yep.
inquiries. The ethic committee shall establish a mechanism by which officials, board members, employees, and residents of the town may obtain advice and counsel from the committee regarding ethical issues that may arise from time to time. Doesn't have to be in writing, doesn't have to be named, there doesn't have to be a form. It just says establish a process. The only thing we would have to have in that process, people could lie, but we would have to have some mechanism by which they say they're a town official, board member, employee, and resident.
Right.
Because in theory, we can't have people from Henniker using this
Sure.
anonymous process. Not that they would, but
Are we
So-
honor systeming that?
So then if
yes,
you're,
there's no other way.
Yeah.
so if that's the case,
Because we do have the ultimate authority if they're going to use the process improperly.
so if we're gonna do an informal question in the Dropbox, if you took this form and you wiped out the name, email, address, you have the certification at the bottom, would that be good? Or do we want something
Well,
like,
they're not gonna certify it if it's anonymous.
oh, because they can't sign it, you're right,
So,
right.
It's a meaningless certification.
That's true, good point. All right,
And we can use the honor system. Please note that this is available only to,
What residents of the town?
Right.
Or
right, and I mean, whatever, if somebody comes to us as a Henniker resident who's not an employee or whatever, and they just are saying it's something ethical,
Good information for everybody. It's
Sure.
harmless in most cases.
And if-
I kind of like that. I really do, because it allows us to speak to it, and we could say like, yes, based on the information that we're being given, this clearly fits into a conflict of interest or what have
It
you.
looks like, you're right.
And, your writer, your next stage, if you decide to pursue this, would be to fill out Form EC, to whatever, for a complaint.
I like that. And it doesn't put a huge bar to get advice and counsel, right? It's like, drop your question.
About as non-bar as I can imagine.
Yeah, right?
Drop a
No,
question.
that's great.
Or you could do like a Dear Ethics Committee and then, and make the statement and then miserable in South Ware,
Because that's not identifying at all.
Exactly.
That's funny.
Oh, I like that. That's Ann Landers.
There you
Or
go.
whatever those columnists are.
And then we don't need the formal inquiry form, right? Because it's just for inquiries, you just drop the question in the box.
But to the extent that there's some information that might be helpful to a person, for example, I don't know if this is helpful, please describe the specific issue.
But as soon as they do the specific issue, they've identified things, and then we're saying that's a complaint.
Yeah.
But that's for,
Yeah, I think you would have to distinguish between the two and say, we need, as we were
Need
saying
some
earlier, we need enough information to answer your question, but not so much that it comes across as an accusation, right?
Specifically vague.
that was Eileen specifically
Right.
vague.
So
Okay,
it,
I'll use an example. I'm a resident of Ware, and I'm dealing with a neighbor who has a very bad septic problem. Who do I talk to? And they're resident to the, the community, and they'll say, well, can you give me more specifics? Well, yeah, I think it's affecting my health or my breathing. So that would be a generic question asked of the Ethics Committee. Do I have the right, or who has the right to approach this person to resolve the problem?
right, but that's not an ethics violation.
Right.
That's a generic,
A
go
generic-
talk to Naomi and she'll tell you.
Okay, and that's how we would
That's how
I
we
was
would
gonna say
respond, right. We
DES,
say that's not
you
an
know.
ethical, it doesn't
Right.
meet the requirements under the policy of ethics, it has to be one of these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah,
But the
thank you
other-
for writing. This does not fall into
Right.
the purview of the Ethics Committee. However,
Or
Yeah.
is it ethical that the person should subject the neighborhood to the smell? Okay?
But the resident didn't sign an ethics,
I was gonna say, well, we're not policing the
Correct.
residents'
But
ethics.
then at that point, we can direct them and say, well, this is who you would talk to.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just, keeping us user-friendly, I think is important.
Yeah.
We don't want to put roadblocks up for people to, be guarded about coming in and getting advice.
so, all right.
so
Boy,
no inquiry.
am I
form?
glad we didn't vote on that?
Right.
So what if we kind of re-center ourselves around that premise, and that really the only formal part of the process would be the complaint?
What about the request for written advisory?
Well, I think, and again, if you want something in writing back from us, right? Because now that you have this ability, from my perspective, you have this ability to go completely anonymous to get some information, right? So I don't have as much of an issue with it then coming out of non-public. If you know that, you've got path A or path B if you want written advice versus advice, right? If you're looking for written advice, there's probably gonna be a name that needs to be attached to it. We need an address to get back to, we need identifying information,
But,
right?
yeah, but
That would follow into the
Please
complaint.
note that the implementation process adopted by the town, so it binds us.
Yeah,
C, paragraph 2, upon request of a town official, board
Sure.
member, or employee, the committee may issue a written advisory opinion. I mean,
may.
we don't have to, but at least to me, this suggests that they have the right to request.
And I agree. I do think that we need to preserve the right to request a formal written response, right? But that's different from what we were talking about
Yes.
earlier.
Right.
Yes,
So I do think there would still be a form for a formal written response that's separate from a complaint.
yes.
Yes.
I think, well,
It says upon request, okay, so they have to request, so that's where you're saying the form comes in. It says we may or may not respond to that, right? So,
But I think the difference
and
is
if
they
we never
identify who
issued
they
a
are.
response, then I think we'd be violating the spirit of this.
sure. I'm just, this is the letter of the law, not the document of how
Right.
they do it, right? So if I read this, it says upon request from someone withstanding who's not a resident, whatever, elected official, appointed official, employee, we may issue a written advisory opinion in response to that inquiry. So that means they're inquiring, asking for something in writing,
And that they've identified themselves as being one of those categories of
right?
citizens
And
of the
that,
town,
then we
member of the
may issue it. So that means we're not
We don't have
right?
to.
So that's a process. Why would you, okay,
And that, to me, is where we gotta get that question answered,
which question?
about how do we communicate with people who are asking for opinion? Complaint is different, right? Like,
Yeah.
and we haven't
I
even
mean,
really
I think
touched
if you're
complaint
asking
yet,
for a
but-
written one, you have to identify
You have to
it.
identify yourself, and that's why
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
form has that,
Yeah.
I think,
And
identifying
then,
information.
you know, is that, if it has, if it could potentially significantly impact somebody's reputation, how do we protect that information?
That would be
And-
back to that
The original.
Back to it,
state
and then,
decision.
Right.
but, so we are coming out of non-public with sealed information that we then have to communicate to somebody.
And at that
We
point.
may.
May.
Yeah,
Well,
right?
we,
So if
what
it's-
what
What
it
about
says
the
is we
telephone?
may
Oh.
respond in
Not for a written
writing,
opinion.
but we don't have, there's no obligation for us to get back to that individual other than to say in the minutes when we come out, for example, in your scenario, we came out of a non-public session, and what we put into the minutes is
The answer.
this inquiry was dealt with in non-public session, and it was decided that the board will not respond, for
In
example.
writing, because once you do it in writing, and I think that's your concern,
Yes.
it's now a public document and it's
Exactly.
not protected.
But
Isn't that true
If
as soon
we're-
as they put it in, to be
No,
clear?
if we open it in non-public and we seal it, it's not public.
Let-
But once if we make a written response and we send it to a committee or a person, at that point, that's a
Yes,
public
absolutely,
document.
yeah, absolutely, okay.
two situations. This is for a written request for an advisory opinion by the proper people. It comes in, chairman brings it to us, we go into non-public, we determine that there is no effect on
Serious, yep.
reputation, we deal with that publicly. Okay? The person has requested an advisory opinion, that's the consequence of this.
Right, here you go.
That's number one. Number two, it comes in and it seems it really ought to be a complaint. We reject, in non-public, we determine that we can't consider this. The chairman telephones the individual to say, I'm sorry, you really need to file, if you want to proceed with this, you need to file a complaint. This is not the purpose of a written opinion request, because you're damaging or potentially damaging someone's reputation. Then that person has the option to do to do something.
Formal, right.
And there is no recoverable information, publicly available information about who it is or anything else.
Right.
Does that work?
Well, so I'm gonna do the third one, right? Because there's another option here. The other option is making an inquiry. I'd like a written opinion. I have written it in a way that protects somebody's confidentiality, but I still want you to write your opinion to
So-
me as the inquirer. I want a written opinion from the board.
But that's not their option.
We would
That's
give
the
it to
board.
them.
Or we wouldn't, depending. We're not required to respond.
We're not required to, but they're asking for.
Right, but what I'm suggesting is, it seems to me that in your case, they're skirting, that we would look at that and say, well, what they're trying to do here is get us to commit to a position that it sounds like might not be appropriate?
Wait a
Is that
second.
what you're suggesting?
If the request for a written opinion does not damage anyone's reputation seriously, we deal with it in public.
Session.
And they get an answer and everybody knows.
But it has to be written.
It's,
In the
yes,
Yes.
and it's
Yeah.
public. It's in the minutes and it's public. And it's, you probably send them a copy if you wanted to. But if in fact it came in and it would damage somebody's information, we reject it in private session. The chair makes a call and says, hey, you got to do this by complaint, or you've got to ask it in a form that no individual can be identified and his reputation adversely affected. So,
Are we doing, okay.
doesn't that,
I
is
think
there,
that would.
I don't see the third
reasonableness.
case, maybe you do.
Well, if somebody wanted a written.
Right.
As long as what's written doesn't,
Does
The-
minutes count as written?
yeah,
If it were in the.
remember
minutes.
that we've gone into non-public to determine whether or not this inquiry is really a complaint.
Yes, and we've already established that it's not. And we
Then-
come out and we have the discussion in public, and then that discussion is in the minutes and on videotape, so it met the standard of having it in writing.
Well, and also,
Yes.
but this says may, right, so the
Yeah.
intent is you've met it, but I really think the rubber hits the road on the written, it's gonna be, it depends. If the select board are saying we really want something because we wanna use that for some policy, something, then we may treat it differently than an employee says, hey, I saw somebody vaping around the corner and they're not supposed to do that here, is that ethical, like that? Should that be written? No, but, I feel like how we handle each written one is gonna depend on the meat of the question.
Right, but we can handle those in public session,
Once we've done that
once
initial gate.
once we've done the
We
screening.
can discuss it, but by the nature of it being a written request, to Eileen's question, is the minutes good enough? Or a written ruling, does that need to be a letter? Like, there's a whole piece around how we handle that.
I think that's up to us.
Yeah.
And we could change that on a case-by-case basis. Now, I would suggest that the best business practice for us as a committee, if we want to maintain, the respect of the town, would be normally to respond in writing to the individual. But might be exceptions where, maybe we've already responded to the exact same question, we reference something like that.
Right,
But
right.
normally, I would think we'd want to respond. I would think amongst ourselves, if we decided not to respond, we'd have a discussion as to why we were doing it.
Sure, fair. But once we've written to that person to answer their request, it's a public document, it's a discoverable document.
And the proceeding and our debate
Sure.
would be in public.
Absolutely.
Yes,
And it might be that, as we proceed, we need more information, in which case we would have to communicate in public with the individual, et cetera.
Right.
Or we could ask the individual to come in. Okay.
does that answer your
I think so.
concern? Okay.
So just so I can recap here, did we decide so I understand right now we're talking about two forms, a complaint form and a formal written inquiry /
Which is the two forms that
advice
existed
and
before we started,
counsel,
right?
But the third thing that we've introduced the idea of is some kind of anonymous
Dropbox.
general question.
Yep.
Okay.
I thought that the inquiry form, C1, just disappeared.
Yes,
There
For
is,
the most part,
people are just going to write, although I
Unless
think a
they
form
want-
helps people, but
Unless they wanted a written response directly to them and they identify who they are. That's the difference,
Right.
is one of them is a formal,
identification and the other's general.
one of them requires them to say, I'm an employee, I'm a citizen, I'm something.
that's EC2.
Right.
EC2 is pretty much the same as it
Right.
appears here, with the addition of email address and that kind of thing.
And then we have the
But,
complaint form,
but
right?
EC1 is going to
No
be
longer needed.
either going to be made anonymous
Yep.
or not exist.
correct.
Okay.
But I
think it doesn't exist. If we're trying to make it friendly for the public to ask questions,
I think if it's anonymous, there's no
there's no
form is
form to
necessary.
be, right? Because you can't even say, I certify this, because you can't sign it. And you have no contact information, so it's just.
Aha,
Give
so
us a letter.
Form EC2 now just became C1.
All right,
because we
or-
have no
Or
one.
C.
Unless
or
we
C.
keep C1 and use that for a more severe inquiry,
Yeah.
because they,
I-
I don't know.
If we're going anonymous, why,
Yeah.
okay. So this is out,
Right,
Okay, good. Less paper.
and that just becomes Form C.
yep.
Okay. Wow.
One less form, that's
Okay.
paperwork reduction right there.
So, process that we just talked about, if you're anyone who has a generic question inquiry you want to counsel, you drop whatever form of information into the Dropbox. We'll pick it up, we'll go into non-public, we'll sort which ones we can answer, which ones we can't. We'll come out of non-public, say, of the 15, I'm being optimistic, the 15 we received, 5 of these are too specific and really need to be a complaint form. The other ones, we're gonna go through one at a time and sort of discuss, give information. If we get a written one, same thing, it goes into that sorting bin. Except if there's a direct follow-up to the person who asked, right? If it's a complaint, we haven't even touched that process and probably shouldn't, 10 minutes to go. But,
So if I could, what I would suggest is that we have an accept or rejected on potential inquiries, rather than saying, because I think to just straight say if we're rejecting something, just, we've rejected this, and
Right, but we no longer have a form, so we can use the terminology rejected and accepted, and you'll have to remind me, because I'll forget it. But there's no checkbox, because there's no form, right?
I was just saying for
Sure.
the minutes, we would say.
We've accepted so
We've
many,
accepted this
we
one,
rejected
we've
so
rejected
many.
this one,
Well,
and then move on.
And it's a process of elimination for whoever's,
Fair.
whoever's dropped it into the box.
They're
Like,
gonna see the
we
answer,
looked
they'll
at
figure it
10,
out, right.
if you haven't heard your answer, it's because you were a bit too
Rejected.
specific and we were, we unfortunately had to reject it. If you'd like to take another shot at writing it up, we'll be happy
But
to,
we'll look at another
Or
one.
Yeah.
and
maybe
we'll
appoint
know
it
it was you.
Go into non-public session and have the
Yeah.
conversation. Set it up
What-
on the agenda.
Okay.
you gotta let it marinate, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose if a person is really paying attention, they would know that of the 15 forms, of the 2 that we are not answering, theirs was one.
Is there a question, wasn't it?
We probably don't have to communicate
Right,
with
no,
them.
well, we can't, because it's anonymous, right?
No, but,
We're
well,
not even gonna know who they are.
Right.
So the one extra, question,
I'm freezing, my nose is
Yeah.
dry.
Me too.
so, I don't know about y'all, but I'll get emails, questions, like, is this an ethical issue, blah, blah, blah. So should we then add those to the bucket of anonymous topics?
you personally as chairman
Yeah,
are now getting questions?
sure. You are?
No.
Okay.
Well,
Has
and,
anybody called you?
no,
Nobody
but the
calls
thing
me.
I wanna
I've had a few
caution you
conversations,
about.
but not calls.
I'm not giving advice.
No, but the fact, like, you move to a response, that's not protected information.
Nope, nope.
So,
All I've said is.
This is by telephone, right?
No.
In writing?
I'm getting texts, I'm getting emails, and I'm
Yes.
getting IMs, yes.
protect yourself. So, I mean, my suggested practice for anybody sitting here with me tonight would be to say, thank you for reaching out. The appropriate, we have
Yes.
not yet established our process, give us some time.
Which is what I've been saying thus far, but eventually that won't be the case. And
Yeah.
so I think at that point, I can either take the information and add it to the Dropbox, or I can say, y'all need to add it to the Dropbox.
Y'all need to add it to the
Yeah.
Dropbox, because if you take the
And
information,
it's
then
not
that's
anonymous.
Right,
a trail.
And it's
So,
not anonymous.
wait a second. You're getting these at which email address?
I'm getting them on my personal email, because nobody knows the ethics one yet, right? I mean,
We're not on, it's not online?
the
It's listed.
town, yeah. I don't know if my personal
But
ethics,
what it's linked to is, they're not using the town as a portal to get to you, because
Right.
if they were, it would be
right,
coming in and out.
right. And it would go to
Not many
everybody.
people
yeah.
that use the town website as the way to
No.
navigate these things.
So yeah, that's a good final, I guess, topic of the day is,
So, is Miss X's email to Wendy discoverable?
My perspective is yes. Can you, 91A
do
comes across,
business.
right? 91A comes across and says, I would like to see all of the public-facing information related to the Ethics Committee, all emails, all correspondence. At this point, the people who are reaching out could be asking a question that could be discoverable.
And again, most times that would
Do
be
you delete
anonymous.
that immediately? Do you tell them, do not email me, this is going to be made it could be made public?
so, because I've been playing this advocate for a very long time with this town, is what I would do is I would respond from my school board account or from my ethics committee account and say, this is the process. But I wouldn't respond from my personal one, because then I've made that trail and I've opened up everything that's in my personal space.
So,
So it's not public, if you randomly receive an email to your personal email, that's not part of your public business, you're not conducting business
even
based
though
on that.
I'm an elected official,
As long as you're not acting on it, because you're not responsible, I mean, I suppose, could they go in and get everything at the end of the day? Sure, but you're not protected at that
When
point.
91As come, they say, I want all on your business and personal. That's how they come, I'm just saying.
and that means that the email she gets on her personal account?
Opens up her own.
Those that
personal email.
are
That was the whole point,
related-
purpose of making sure that we were
We have two
using.
accounts.
related to
Yes.
this
But
committee.
if nobody knows these, having them,
Correct. So as long as I don't respond.
Yes.
I'm good. So that's why I would then respond from, if, even the redirection, I respond from my ethics committee, and I,
yeah, but that's not what you said.
What I'm saying is that if she interacts,
No,
right?
she didn't interact, she just received it. There's a request for discovery.
But if she's responding back and saying, this is not the process, this is
but I
not-
can't respond from my
She's
personal
not
account.
responding at all.
Then she should be,
In other words, you can't discover something on your,
Once I do,
communications to you on your personal email, to which you make no response on your personal email, are not subject to discovery.
I would say that that is a question
I would say that's
that I
mostly
would
true.
bring.
Yeah, okay.
Mostly true.
Mostly true. And on a rare exception, where somebody's bankrolled quite an attorney's, set, they're gonna get what they're gonna get, but, again, for our purposes, I think we can go down bunny trails a lot.
correct.
But we're not, I think we need to solve for the
The
more
90% rule.
likely
Yep.
scenarios, and I don't think we're gonna be dealing with that level of.
No, and I
of,
think that in the
litigation.
ROI on suing for all my personal email for an ethics committee is a lot lower than a school board, right? So I could be wrong, but if I ignore somebody who asked me, I'm a select board and this other person's saying mean things about me, is that ethical? Like, and I ignore it, there's not a
But-
big risk to that.
Yeah, but if it's a big defamation suit, but in any event, you're right. I mean, you're right to do what you did to respond from your school account.
But,
And we should respond from our ethics emails.
But back to, we had talked a couple meetings ago about putting something out, right, in the, Where in the World,
Yes,
and also posting that same thing on the town's
correct.
website about, what our current, where we are currently.
Yes.
If somebody's not watching this. So I don't know that we did anything in June. I don't know
No,
if we covered it.
I don't think we had a big enough jump. Like,
Yeah.
I think right now we have an inquiry process, assuming we have a Dropbox.
Well, even before that, I think what we could do at the moment is say, we are not yet at the point to accept any inquiry or any complaint. Please bear with us, we're working through our process, and we
Right.
will announce. And the best way to get in touch,
Sure.
just for general questions, because we're not yet ready, general questions would be to reach us at
Fair,
Ware Ethics Committee
Yep.
at, ware.nh.gov,
fair.
right?
Get that into Where in the World?
Where in the world and,
Put on the
on
webpage.
this-
On our
on a
webpage.
webpage.
Yep.
Because
And also, isn't there a Facebook page or something like that?
God, I hope not.
the
The
town
town?
does have a Facebook page, but I don't know how frequently.
I don't.
Is it used, Naomi?
When I get to it,
No.
I'm
Do,
the one that does it.
no, and forgetting about what you do on it, are there a lot of people who make inquiries to it? Or read it?
It's a push.
Or you don't know?
No, I just put information on it, I don't really,
Get any feedback
There's
on
no
it?
necessarily,
I
Transmit
don't
only.
respond to people.
Yeah.
There's no counter that says how many people viewed the page or something?
You're talking to a lady that's about the least Facebook user in the world.
You could probably find that information, but if it's transmit only,
Okay.
but just to kind of quell anything that could come,
Yep, yep.
Well, this is very helpful tonight.
It was. I feel like we're getting very close.
I'm gonna revise all these forms
oh.
in accordance with what
Oh,
I understand.
We haven't
I
done them
have
all.
them on my
We haven't done
computer.
them all yet.
Yeah, we haven't voted on
We
it.
gotta have a.
No, but it's a lot of work that you've already
is.
done, so I
And
appreciate what
so
you've
that
done.
everybody, so that we can see what we've done and make sure
Could
that
I
this,
suggest, is there a way that we could do like a shared commentary document? So for example, if we have the frequently asked questions and we wanted to circulate proposed changes to it before the meeting,
Yes.
there's
So
multiple
if you have like a
software things.
Google Doc, you
Right.
can do comments
And
and.
track the comments, nothing gets changed until we agree that
I-
that's changed?
I cannot use Google anything.
Okay.
What is your preferred platform?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Explain in English what
Well,
you just asked
what
me.
I was asking, is it like Microsoft Word? Is
I
it-
I use
okay, so
Microsoft
Documents
Word.
like that also has a shared, the ability to do shared commentary, but we would have to settle on,
You'd have to have a place where you
And-
post
and
it,
can we
you have
do
access
that?
to it.
Legally, isn't that a meeting?
it's, well,
It depends on how
I
you
think
do it.
that the question would be, is it a meeting only if a decision has been made? If what we're doing is.
No, you
sending
can
it-
have a meeting. There,
Yeah.
when
so-
you get together, even if you don't make decisions, you have a
There-
meeting.
But in the case of independently editing a document, there's no joining of people. You're not there at the same time chatting
It
about the
depends.
pros and cons.
It depends,
I
and so.
suppose you could do the bubble on the side and say,
So this has been a topic in my other world quite a bit, right? So it becomes a meeting if 2 or 3 people are working on the same document at the same time, and there's certain conditions where you can do it and you're allowed to do it.
Like if you shipped it to Suzanne, and then Suzanne sent it to Wendy only, and then Wendy sent it to Neil, and then Neil sent
That's
it to
okay.
me.
But when
And then
you-
I brought it, you
Right.
know, is different than it going back and forth. You got more than 2 people, you're having a meeting, whether you're in person or you're in an
no,
email.
I understand the going back and forth. I wasn't suggesting, what I was suggesting is one portal where everybody goes in and adds their comments.
But when everybody does that on the same shared document, there's a couple, it's
There's a
considered a
catch.
meeting,
Okay,
right?
so no, we can't do that.
Right.
Okay.
But you can take notes so that way.
But
Sure.
you have a
Let's-
copy of his document, so you
I
can.
do, but
you can
what
run-
I was hoping is we could all, like.
How about this, though?
Have this,
I send out a document, and Luke comments on it to everyone, and that's it. Suzanne comments on it to everyone. Wendy comments to everyone.
Nope. As soon
No.
as you're responding to everyone, you've started a meeting,
Okay.
right?
but
And
if
so-
I were to respond to you alone,
To the originator.
to the originator with just my comments, then that's not a meeting. Now, it may be that you could send that individually and say, just respond to
I've
me.
sent this legally, as I understand it, to all of you.
Correct.
Right, yep.
That
Yeah,
was,
but nobody
But
responded.
when you
Right.
respond,
right.
as soon as you do respond all, you're starting to that slippery slope of
Okay.
meeting, so.
So it'd probably be better for us not to dabble in that for now and
Well,
just.
so if you send them, Neil,
Back 'em, yeah.
and we independently on our own edit and then come,
Make our
because you're
comments and-
trying to be efficient, I appreciate
Yes.
that. But so if we each do our own edit at home, if we make a commitment that each of us is gonna look at the document on our own time and then bring in our proposed edits
to the next
to the
fiscal
next
meeting.
meeting,
That's
then-
legit.
yep, that's legit and it's
I was just
more
looking at
efficient than,
redundancies
yeah,
and,
right?
but yeah, understand.
Okay.
It's
All right.
the compromise.
I get it.
So next meeting, and I'm about to close this one because we're out of time, will be round 2 of these documents.
And that's
Yes.
the 19th,
19.
right?
2 weeks from.
Yeah, we only have 2 meetings this month?
7/19, 7/26, and
26 is also on
7/5.
there? I did not see the 26 on the
It
website.
wasn't on the website, it was
It
just the
was in
19th.
my, I think it was in the minutes, right?
Okay, but it didn't
It's-
hit for
yeah.
our July schedule
Yeah.
on the town roster.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, so the calendar needs
So
to be
now, yeah,
updated.
can we do the 26 as well? Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I had
Okay.
7/5, 7/19.
I thought there were 3, but I only saw 2, that's why I was asking. Okay, cool.
Okay, so,
So not next week, but the week after.
right,
Beauty.
excellent. All right, so thank you, public, for being here. We're now closing today's ethics committee.
I'll make a motion to close this meeting.
Yes?
Second.
All in favor?
Yeah.
Aye.
Good. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, so we can switch.